In my last video, I shared how combining botanicals with handmade texture stamps can help you build richer, more visually interesting gel prints. And the response was amazing. Thank you so much for all the likes, views, and thoughtful comments. One comment in particular stood out. A viewer mentioned that while they loved the techniques, it would have been easier to follow if I'd shown one print from start to finish, before jumping into variations. And you know what? They're absolutely right. So in this video, I'm going to walk you through the entire process of creating one finished print, step by step. Then we'll repeat the process with 2 additional prints, so you can see how each choice, color, texture, and plant matter, changes the result. If you're new to gel printing or just wanting a clearer view of how all the pieces fit together, this video is a great place to start. Here are the 3 prints we'll be creating today. These are 2-layer prints made using botanicals and texture tools, each built with the same materials but combined in different ways. So all the supplies I'm using today are listed in the description. I'm using Golden Open paint, but if you don't have that, just mix a bit of the Golden Open gel into your regular acrylics and they'll dry a lot more slowly. I'm going to be using 9x12 mixed media paper today on my 12x14 inch plate, and I'll just be rolling out part of the plate because that's all I need. Now for the first layer of the first print, I'm going to keep the palette quite light. So I'm going to be using green gold and just a little bit of sap green. I also don't want to put too much paint on the plate. This doesn't need to be a thick layer. It'd be better if it was a lighter layer. The print will get darker when we put the second layer on, so that's always something to think about. Now, without a lot of paint on the plate, it actually takes a little longer to roll it out. I just have to be patient. Keep going back and forth in different directions. Make sure that the roller spins so that you're not just putting paint back and forth on the same spot. And then as it gets closer to the end, you can give it a little bit more pressure. Get it really spread out well. And then the last few strokes need to be really quite light. There we go. Now for this layer, I thought I would use some grasses. These give quite a nice spiky sort of a look to them. I'm going to let them overlap a bit. You just want to play around with them until you feel like you get the right combination of lines going in the directions that you want. Now we're going to take some texture tools. So this is one that I made myself. I just cut the letters out of foam and then stuck it to this board. Frankly, I really like this one. I've made quite a few, and this one I keep going back to. It's sort of a favorite. This one was out of the recycle bin. It's just the bottom of some piece of packaging that came into the house from the grocery store. You need to press fairly firmly to make an imprint on the plate, especially when you've got plants underneath. Whoops, don't really want to move the plants, but that's okay. And you can actually see there, it's made a good little imprint. And think about what sort of shapes you might like where. I love circles. I use circles all the time. So this little piece of packaging is just one of my favorites. This is another one that I made. It's just little wooden squares from the dollar store. And again, I've glued it onto a little piece of cardboard backing. And then this one is just string glued onto a piece of foam core. You can make all kinds of little tools like this, and they really do work very well, and they're basically just free because it would have been wasted stuff. Now, I'm not going to get too carried away with texture in this lower layer, but I am going to make some marks with my drink cooler. And I use this a bit to help bring two pieces of texture together. There we go. So the plate is all set up with the paint, the botanicals, and the texture. So now we're going to take the first layer of our print, and I'm using mixed media paper today because it does quite well in multi-layer print situations. It stands up to a fair bit of punishment, and it takes wet media well. Something like printer paper, which you could also use, doesn't stand up to the wet layers as well. It wasn't designed to, whereas the mixed media paper is designed to deal with water. There's quite a few other papers that are interesting that you could use for a print like this. And I recently did a video on testing 10 different papers for printing and collage purposes. I'll link that in the description below. There. Just give it a real good rub, especially along all the lumpy bits. Oh, that's beautiful. So that's the first layer for the first print. And I've kept the overall value and the colors quite light so that when we put on the second layer, neither layer will dominate too much. So you'll see that in just a moment. I now need to leave this to dry, and then I'll be back to print the second layer on it. Now, by the way, anytime I have the plate set up with something interesting on it, I've just lifted the grasses off of it. I take a print. It may not be the print I'm looking for today, but it may be a useful background layer in a future print. And sometimes I get very nice surprises, and it turns out to be a favorite print. So, hey, don't waste the paint or the time and effort. Oh, look at that. Yeah, I quite like that. So my first layer is dry. So I'm going to add a second layer. And I want the white spaces to work out well. Now the white spaces are where the botanicals have been. So I've got very thrusty, angular botanicals on this layer. So I'm thinking something like this Virginia creeper, which will come up this side and over here and then out again. That might be quite an interesting combination for this. So I'm going to set up the plate again. I'm going to use a harmonious color. Again, I don't want it to be too dark because that would overpower this print. So I'm thinking of sticking with a little bit of green and probably combining it with a little bit of ultramarine blue. So just a few little dabs. And this will take a few minutes to roll out. I'll probably fast forward some of the rolling on the video just so that you don't have to sit and watch me roll paint for forever. So this will combine some green and some blue on this print, on this layer. This is not very dark. As you can, it looks pretty transparent to me. I think this will be a good amount of paint. Here we go. Now, first thing, somewhat gingerly, place my botanicals on here. So, you know, it's a little bit of a delicate process. Some of them want to flop over or go in spaces where I don't really want them to be. It'd be kind of nice if I could get that to come down there, but if it doesn't want to, then it won't. Okay, now I do want to put some texture on this plate, and I have to be careful not to repeat the texture directly that I've got. So remember that this print will be reversed, so I don't want to use this concentric circle thing here. I might use it in a different place, like maybe down here. Don't have to repeat these textures. Sometimes it's better to come up with something fresh. Of course, there's a lot of plant matter under it, so it's going to be interrupted anyway, so that's kind of a good thing. Now this is going to come here, so maybe my squares would be a nice foil to that. And I'll use some of these textures over here. There. Now, just like the first time, if I want to interrupt the texture that I've got on the plate with some other marks, that's just fine. There we go. Now, I do hope this one's going to behave itself and sit down there. Can never be really sure. Okay, so once I've got that, I'll take my first layer, and I'm just going to encourage that leaf to spread out. There we go. And I'll take my second layer onto this. Again, a little difficult rubbing around the botanicals. They're a little lumpy. You just want to press your fingers in and try to get a nice clean image. There we go. Oh, I'm quite pleased with that. So you can clearly see the original grasses, so I have not overwhelmed that. But I've also got the Virginia creeper quite clearly in here as well. The Virginia creeper is showing the original light green from the first layer. And then where I had the more bluish green, you can see that quite clearly in the area that would have been white space in the grasses. So I'm quite happy with that print. Now here's another bonus print. It's quite light, but I hate to waste these things. Sometimes you set up a plate, it takes quite a while to set it up. It's nice to get more than one print off of it. Oh yeah, look at that. That'll make a fine background for something. So this next print uses the techniques that we used in the first print, but separated into two distinct layers. The first layer will consist of just texture, and then the second layer will include botanicals. So this layer, again, I want to keep quite light. I'm going to use fairly light, transparent colors. I'm going to start with a little green gold, add a little bit of ultramarine blue, and just a little bit of transparent red iron oxide. By the way, this is a great cost saving. If you use a fair bit of a pigment, buy it in one of these little tubs. It's much, much cheaper than the tubes. Sometimes if I get a color like the ultramarine blue that it doesn't want to kind of blend with the other ones. I'll just do a little circle with the brayer, and that seems to help it mingle better, play nicer. And I want kind of a brownish stripe on this side, so that's the transparent red iron oxide. And then, of course, a little bit of that along the bottom. So I'm not going to blend super thoroughly here. There we go. Now, this time, I'm not going to use any botanicals on this. I'm going to go with just texture. So this is a texture plate I made out of corrugated cardboard. I just removed the surface layer of the cardboard in areas to reveal the corrugations. So this gives it a fairly interesting texture. I can kind of use as a base layer. And because this cardboard is lumpy, you have to kind of give it a good press. That's all right. Keeps us fit. There we go. Oh yeah, that's quite interesting. That's interesting on its own, but I think I'd like a little bit more. So I'm going to include some large circles from this thing that came in underneath a cake. And I'll just decide where to put that. Don't want to center it too much. All these little things about where to put what. These are all good questions. It all comes down to design and composition, of course. Oh, there we are. That's added a little bit more to that. And I'm going to add some letters over here. I do like letters and text in my work, but I don't want them necessarily to mean anything, if that makes any sense. And just a few squares as well. There. Now, each time I use one of these texture tools, it helps make the paint a little bit lighter. That's not a bad thing. And then I think I'm going to add some of my, oh, I love this whisk. This whisk makes a marvelous spiral. And I just kind of bounce it around the plate into different areas. Possibly not too many. I could easily get carried away with my whisk. Okay, I think we're set up here. I think this will make an interesting layer. So I'm going to print it onto a piece of mixed media paper. This will form the first layer of print number 2. Oh yeah, so look at that. I like that combination of colors. And after the second layer goes on, I think it'll be a very nice background. Now again, I wouldn't want to throw out what is left on this plate. So I'll take another print for use in another project. Oh, and look at that. It's just a lighter version of the previous print. And that would make a beautiful background for something. So for print number 2, we're going to add the positive print of the botanicals. So to do that, I'm going to roll out a fairly dark layer of paint, and I'm going to use a fair bit of paint. Often I'll choose Payne's Gray to start with to get me dark. It gets dark quick. And then choose perhaps a second color to go with it. And I can either choose a harmonious color in the browns, for example, or I could go for a punch of something slightly different. So I'm going to use the dioxazine purple. I think that'll make a nice, foil against the warmer colors. So quite a bit more paint. See how quickly it gets dark on the plate. This is transparent paint, but there's enough paint on the plate to be quite solid. Now I like to roll this out until I hear a little bit of a sticky sound, and that tells me I've got a good even layer. There. Now we're going to go with these guys again, because I do kind of like these. Little Virginia creeper. But this time we're not texturing the background. As a matter of fact, we don't want the background. We need to clean the background off completely, so that when we lift the plant, all we have left is the image of the plant ready to put onto this print. Now what I like to do for this is I like to take it off with tissue paper. And I can use those prints in my collage work, so they're not wasted. And when I've put this much paint on the plate, it's probably going to take me 4 or 5 tissues to clean off the background paint. Now I can use my roller, a clean roller, to just do the pressing for me, or at least get the bulk of the pressing done. And then I just kind of use my thumb and go into it and clean out the rest. By the way, these first dark negative prints are great to use if you want to create some stencils. You can use the idea of what's printed here and just cut it out of something that's a bit more sturdy. Deli paper would be fine for this as well, if you happen to have deli paper. And if you're not really interested in using it for collage, you could use printer paper. Printer paper doesn't really adhere very well to collage work. It gets all lumpy and bumpy. There we go. So that's clean off number 2. You can see there's much less paint on the plate now. I make a lot of prints on tissue in the summer. Well, there's plants available because I live in a part of Canada where everything's under snow in the winter. That's clean off tissue number 3. Some colors clean off really easily, and you'll have it all cleaned off in like 3 prints. But the colors that we're using, particularly the dioxazine purple, but also the Payne's gray, they kind of, they're ever-going colors. They kind of remind me of that Energizer Bunny ad. They just continue to come up. And I really do want quite a clean, paint-free background here, because I don't want the paint in the background of the plate to make a cloudy mess on top of my print. A little tricky talking about all this because background has so many meanings in this. Starting to get hard to pull off the plate now. There we go. There. I actually really enjoy these light prints. And I think I have it all off. I'm just going to do a little test. Yeah, that's pretty clean. So that was a total of 4 clean off sheets. So now I'm going to delicately lift this little plant. Oh, look at that. That is a really interesting image. And I think the paint is strong enough to make a good contrast on this print. So now, gingerly, I have to decide if I'm going to lose a tiny little bit. I think it might end up being that leaf up there. And just give it a good rub. Doesn't need a lot. It just needs to be in contact with the plate. Oh, and there we go. Look at that. So that is print number 2. We've got the textured background in one color and then the botanicals over top in a dark punchy color. And I'm going to take what's left on the plate off onto a piece of tissue because like I say, I can use this type of imagery in my collage work. Oh, it's beautiful. Now this last print is very similar to print number 2 in that we'll be using texture in the first layer and botanicals in the second. But this time we're going to add some simple circle masks when we create the first layer to save some of the white of the paper. Now the rollout is going to be just the same as the previous ones. But for some variety, I'm going to use some different colors. So I'm going to use a little bit of the India white hue. And a little bit of the transparent red iron oxide. And then just for a little bit of wildness, I'm going to throw in a tiny amount of dioxazine purple. There. Dioxazine purple isn't on the same side of the color wheel as the other two, which are basically a yellow and an orange. So this is going to create a bit more of a neutral color, but I think it could be quite interesting. And by the way, for those of you that might be noticing this, if I have a color that tends to leave a mark on the plate when I squeeze it out, like the ultramarine blue or sometimes the dioxazine purple, I'll just put it on a piece of palette paper beside my plate and then just spread it a bit with a palette knife so that I don't get those kinds of marks. Now this might be quite a lot of paint. We'll see how it rolls out. I still want it to be fairly light because this is just a first layer. And frankly, the second layer simply won't show if the first layer is too dark unless the second layer is opaque, which is another thing altogether. I tend to use transparent colors. I just like them. They're so luminous and interesting. Now you can see I've got quite distinct marks with that purple, but for the purpose of this print, I think that will be just fine. Now this is a texture plate that I created from a piece of styrofoam that comes underneath packaging from the grocery store. And I pressed into it a bunch of different kinds of circles. So, you know, the lids from different types of caps and bottles. I believe the smaller one was from a pen top. So this can leave quite an interesting sort of mark. And I think I'll go sideways with it. So basically it's going to pick up the paint on the surface of the styrofoam, except of course where the indents were made. And where the indents were made, it will leave the paint on the plate. Oh, yeah. So you can see where that's made a very interesting mottled texture. And that kind of suits the way that the paint is rolled out. I love the little bullseye that creates. And this is just some elastic bands around some cardboard. And that makes kind of an interesting linear mark as well. There we go. Now again, I might use secondary marks where I think that something needs to be integrated. So this area down here is quite large, so I'm just going to give it a couple of blobs. And I'm not quite sure if I like that edge, so just change it a little bit. Good. Okay, now for this one, I could print this right now, but for this print, I'm going to add some circle masks. So what the circle mask will do, it will stop the paint from transferring to the paper. So it'll leave the white of the paper. I have to think about this because I've used a fair number of circles in here already. And they don't all have to be completely on the page. There we go. All right, so let's see how this looks. Now I am going to want to rub fairly thoroughly where I think the edges of the circles are, because I'd like a nice clean edge around those masks. Those masks are really easy to make. Just basically take anything that's circular that you can find in your house and put it down and draw a circle on a piece of paper or plastic and cut them out. Oh yeah. So that's kind of what I was looking for. The idea of having a rich textured background for the botanicals, but also some white spaces on there. And of course, I never waste paint. So I'm going to take another print. Oh, I like that. Sometimes I like the second ones better than the first ones. And then I'm going to lift these circles. And I'm going to take a print of these too. This does two things for me. One is I've now got quite an interesting print to play with, and it's also gotten more of the paint off my plate, so it's easier to clean. So this is the third print. It's dry now, and it's kind of an interesting situation because I can look at it this way, or I could look at it this way, or of course, there's the horizontal layouts as well. All different possibilities to think about. And then I have to pair it with a plant. So when I'm laying out this plant, or even selecting the plant, I have to remember that the image will flip. So my big circle is going to be over here. So I have to decide what imagery I want inside that circle, and then where do I want the rest of the plant to go. And you have to remember, the plants don't always cooperate with this. So sometimes there's a little bit of pruning and pushing and, saying, okay, you got to stay there. So this would come this way in here. So this stem would come in this direction, which I think would be a good thing. And then I would get a couple of the leaves up in here. And it's quite difficult to precisely guarantee that that's going to happen in that particular area. Part of the joy of monoprinting is it is a bit random. And that's not a bad thing. It allows the outcome to be a bit more interesting. Now, in terms of a second color with the blue, I think I'm going to go with the purple again. There's already a bit of purple in there. Purple's a very powerful color, this dioxazine purple. You really don't need a lot of it. And there is already a fair bit of paint on my roller from the last print that I made. So, give it a good roll out. There's quite a lot of paint there, of course. I want there to be lots of paint underneath the plants when I lift them up. And again, I just wait for this to sound just a little bit sticky. Good. Okay, so this has to come over here like this. The good thing about the paint on the plate is it tends to stick these guys down, which is helpful. Okay, now we go through the same clean-off routine that we did for print number 2. So a very nice first print. Clean off sheet number 2. Clean off sheet number 3. This will probably be the last one. Clean off sheet number 4. And I really like to get in and around the little negative spaces because I find those to be the most interesting in a print. There we go. Clean off sheet number 4. And you know, I'm still seeing paint in the background. I used quite a bit of purple this time, so that takes more sheets to pick it up. So I'm just going to do one last pickup. Because in this case, I would really like this beautiful background not to be overprinted by the color I have on here. I just want the botanicals. Ah, yeah. See? Not much, but just enough to wreak havoc. Okay. I take off the plants somewhat gingerly. Often those plants will dry with the paint on them, and I can use them again. I'm really liking this. I'm thinking that this is going to work well. So I'm going to line up my edge here. And get a good clean print of that. Oh yeah, look at that color combination. What the circles has allowed me to do is to really draw the eye into this area. The white of the paper against the dark of the botanical with the little variations in, you know, little purple, little Payne's gray. I think that really helps bring this print together. So here are our 3 prints. Print number 1 combined 2 negative prints onto the same paper. It used harmonious colors and kept the colors light so that neither layer took over. This is print number 2. So first the texture was printed on layer number 1, and then the positive of the botanical was printed as a second layer. And I really like the way this combines. Print number 3 was done the same way, except it also used some circle masks to save the white of the paper. And that, I think, creates a nice focal point up in this area. I hope seeing the full process, from start to finish, helped clarify how these prints come together. Whether you're working with just one layer or building up more, combining botanicals with texture tools is a great way to add depth and interest to your prints. As always, don't be afraid to experiment. Sometimes the most interesting results come from trying something a little different. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing for more gel printing tips and ideas. And if you'd like a little more inspiration delivered to your inbox, be sure to sign up for my newsletter. You'll find the link in the description. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.